Building dams is hard. You've got to keep it from flooding. You need to make sure it's keeping every part of your system irrigated. And worst of all, you've got to keep adjusting it every 20 seconds during a drought or bad tide. Say goodbye to all of these problems and more with the humble Sluice. Introduced in Update 6, the Sluice is an automatic way to manage water. You need the height of the water downstream at a specific level? Use a Sluice. You want to only allow water that isn't contaminated with Badwater through? Use a Sluice. Want to make an automatic system that expels Badwater from the map during a bad tide? You guessed it, use a Sluice. Today, we incorporate the Sluice into Tutopolis. We start by adding a few to our original dam, creating a system that lets water out both when the dam is high and low, and then move on to a second, even larger reservoir. While we're at it, we make this one automatically handle bad tides for us, so that we no longer have to do the bad tide floodgate shuffle. And something I'm doing specially for this episode. If you want to skip all the preparation and preamble and just skip straight to the explanation of how sluices work and watch me incorporate them into the dams, go to the timestamp at the bottom of the screen. There should be a chapter right at that moment. You'll skip all the beginning stuff. Anyway, if you're still here, welcome back to Tutopolis. Today we are incorporating sluices, but before we get to that, there are a few things I do need to just do real quick. Number one, unpausing this double lodge. As we learned last time, we actually have more than enough resources because I was doubling the length of the drought. I also need to not set these large tanks to supply. They need to be set to the default setting. And last but not least, the problem that is actually going to impact this episode, our wood over here. We do not have enough of it. Luckily, a few episodes ago, we opened up this big space for farming. So I'm just going to build out a little bit here. And now once we are here, I'm just going to build us another forester. And then we are going to build a big pasture of oaks. And since we are going to need them in the future, we have chestnuts over here. We still do not have maples or pines. So we are going to do a somewhat small patch of maples and pines. I'm leaving a bit of a space of separation just in case I need it. I don't think I will, but having that space of separation would be better than not having it at all. I'm also going to set these beavers while they are waiting. I'm going to give them a way down here underwater because they can still cut down these trees even though these trees are dead. I'm also, to take up some of these jobs, I'm going to put down a few more metal gatherer flags. This is again something that will be more useful in the future. We're not having any issues reaching the supply of metal that we need, but it is there. And the last thing we need to do to prepare is to ready our area where we are building our second dam. We are going to start with this dam down here, but I want to make sure that everything up here is ready for when we build. And while they will build those pretty quick, I'm also actually going to give us just one more extra builder's hut. I'm going to build that over here. Now this might seem like an odd spot because we've got the other builder's hut over here. It's mostly because this will eventually be its own district and will probably need its own builder's hut. And then the other thing we're going to need to do, we've gotten up here. This is going to be the height that we build the dam across at. But since we have unlocked dynamite, I want to get rid of this step here. I want it to just go from this height down to this height, and this whole area will be our dam. So we need to get rid of this right here. To do that, I'm going to take some triple platforms and I'm going to build us a path across. And then those triple platforms are going to come over here. And then we're also going to have a staircase down. And then this entire area we will fill with dynamite. The other thing we're going to want to do, just to prep, is we are going to want to build storages up here for logs, planks, metal, and explosives. Now these will all speed up the process that is going to be happening with these builders. And then the other thing we're going to want to do is we're going to want to make this as big of an area as possible. So we're actually going to eliminate some of this wall here, probably back to either that block or maybe just in line with these trees here. So I am going to build, once again, stairs up so that we can do that. And now that that is finished, I am going to go through and I'm going to methodically cut a right angle into this rock here and get rid of this plateau that has been created. However, while I am busy with all of the boring work, let's move the episode on to explaining exactly how a sluice works. So, sluices. They cost 400 research points, they take 5 planks and 5 metal blocks. So sluices are a single block height. They take in water from one direction and they let it out the other direction, which you can see up top. If I were to, say, delete all these and then put them in the opposite way, the arrow will show which direction the water will flow through. So it's trying to flow from the back to the front here. We will see that the water is backed up and then eventually overflows because this is only 1 block high. So in their default state, set in the right direction with the water flowing from back here to in front, they almost appear like they are not doing anything because they're letting the water through. However, if we click on one, we can see the wide range of options that these have. So first of all, right now it is set to auto. It has 2 other settings here. Always open, always closed. As we see when we close it, as we might expect, the water flows back over. Open, it just flows through. Auto, in most cases, like this, we are going to see that the water is just going to flow through freely. And that's because of the options we have below here. So we have close above downstream depth, close above contamination level, and close below contamination level. So right now what we are seeing is that the water is flowing through because by default they are set to close above downstream depth 50, which we can also see with this little blue guy right here. That means that if the water were to get above this blue line, and it can't because the water over here is flowing freely. But if the water were to get above that blue line, all of these would close. Now to demonstrate that, I'm going to set this to close above downstream depth 0.15, which is going to be below where water is usually when it's flowing freely. And as we can actually see right now, this says closed. This should be synchronizing with all the adjacent floodgates. If they are all closed. And as we watch, the water behind will build up until it flows directly over, because these ones are just sitting at closed. The water is above the depth that they will be at to open. If we set it to 1, we will watch as they open up again, and eventually this water will all flow right off. There we go. Now, an important thing to note about a sluice. The number for close above downstream depth can only be as high as the sluice is. We cannot set it to if we had a dam over here. So this is too high. We cannot set this sluice, since it is at this height, to let water or to stop letting water out any height above this. So as we will see, this sluice is closed because it's getting up to too high over here. And we cannot set this sluice anywhere above 0.1. So this sluice will always be closed. We can't set it to, for example, close above 1.5 if that's how high we want the water to be over here. It can only be as high as the sluice is. Now, luckily, with sluices, if we did want it to be too high, we could put another row of sluices up here. And this is pretty poorly built, so it's just overflowing. But in theory, this would be preventing water from flowing here. Now, the other thing to note with this setting is that it does go downward. So while you cannot set the height higher than the sluice itself, if a sluice is on a cliff like this, I can set the downstream depth all the way to the bottom of that cliff. So if, for instance, I wanted this to be, say, like halfway up the cliff, I could set it to there. And then if the water, again, if we had anything built here, the water could only get up to there. And actually, let me just demonstrate that. So we've got our dam here that's going to be 2 blocks above the base height. And a dam is 0.65 high. So this dam here will overflow when the water gets to 2.65 height. The levees over here we have set to close above a downstream depth of 2.3. So that's 3.5 below the dam height here. And importantly, what I keep forgetting to do in these explanations I'm doing, up here, there is an outlet for the water to go so that it will not just spill over the top and ruin the demonstration. So what we will see is that if we close these sluices down here, the water in this reservoir will fill up, and it may spill over the side of this dam just because of Timberborn's water physics being a bit funky. See, there it goes. But these ones up here, these sluices, should stop momentarily. And part of the issue here is just the way that Timberborn calculates water height is a bit inconsistent with what it's actually showing. But we will see that in a second, yeah, there it stops spilling over here, and then these stop spilling over. And then as we watch over here, the water will start hydrating this area and not spilling over. So since this reservoir is above that 2.3 mark, it means that these sluices will not open. That water will just spill out. If we speed up time and let this water evaporate, we will see that eventually... Now I'm literally just sitting here with the game at 30 times speed waiting for water to evaporate. I'm a great YouTuber. These... It is very momentary. These sluices for just a second detected that this water was below 2.3. And we can actually watch it here with this downstream depth indicator. So we've got 2.3. And then it will drop down. And then immediately open back up and fill above that 2.3. The point is that when it's not like it was earlier where it was filling up this reservoir from the bottom, it keeps that at almost exactly 2.3. It's between 2.3 and 2.32. Now the other option we have on sluices is going to be close above contamination level and close below contamination level. So when it speaks of contamination here, it is talking specifically about Badwater. This allows us to do something interesting though. For example, if I set these sluices to close above contamination 5%, and I come over here and I set these 2 levels of sluices to close below contamination level 5%, and then I make sure that they're all set on auto, and if I just trigger a Badtide, we can watch as this Badtide rolls through, and what we will see is that down here, the bad water will start pouring out, and over here, no bad water will get through. Now this over here with 6 openings should be more than enough that it actually won't flood over our too high dam here. So with this setup, we actually don't have to worry about bad water getting into this part of the system at all anymore, except for when it does overflow. Also, let all of this rubble and all of whatever is going on over here be an important lesson that when you are making one of these little gates to let all of the bad water through, remember to make sure that the bottom one especially has close above depth turned off. Otherwise you will just flood everything with bad water anyway. But proof of concept, this does allow you to build a dam that you do not have to fiddle with to survive a bad tide. Now the other option this presents, and fair warning, I will never be building something like this into Topless for real, is a system that right from the start either lets bad water through or expels it. So if we were to just get our necessary 6 sluices and then levy off everything else. So with our 6 sluices on a dam like this, we'll see that water will spill through fine. And then the only other thing we need to do, if we look here with these closed, water can very quickly, it will not flow back over these water sources. It does not matter how high we get up. There is an invisible wall here that makes it so that water won't flow out like this. However, if we simply were to blow up some dynamite here and then close these, we would see that eventually, I think it's 2 blocks away, maybe 3, the water is able to flow out again. So if we set this to auto and close only above contamination level, we will see that the water is able to flow through fine normally. But in a bad tide, it immediately expels all of the water off the map. And if we did have water further down this system, even here, it would never be contaminated with bad water. Now again, I am never going to make something like this into Topless. I think it is far too cheesy, and it kind of goes against the spirit of things. But if you wanted to put something like this in one of your maps, it certainly does exist as an option to trivialize every bad tide forever. But now that we have learned all about how sluices work, I think it's time to check whether our beavers have finished back into Topless. And they certainly have. So as we can see, we cut a big hole through here. We eliminated that middle platform. We will be building a large dam over here very soon. First though, I want to incorporate sluices into the dam we already have. The first thing I'm going to do is actually just let all this water out. I may have let it out a little too quickly. It'll solve itself. We're going to be demolishing these floodgates, so we may as well do that now when the drought's early anyway. The other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to get rid of this floodgate and this levee. Now that is because the first sluice I want to build is right here. I'm going to build a sluice there, and then I'm going to build a levee on top of it. I'm going to set the loose sluice I'm going to set to close above downstream depth of 0.75. So no longer will I have to watch and make sure that this bit of the map has water in it to make sure that these trees are watered. As long as there is water in this reservoir that is above that first block, it will put water into this bit. Now I've put it a block up as opposed to on this bottom levee here, mostly because if there's only a single block of water here, we are having an issue, and I don't want it to be using up the water in that instance. Next, we're going to go over here and we are going to knock down all of our triple floodgates. And we are going to tell our beavers to pick all this crap up because I don't want it to get stuck on the wrong side of the dam. And then as they finish picking up this last bit of rubble, I'm going to come down here to floodgate. I'm going to make sure that the arrow at the top is pointing from this part of the reservoir to this part of the water system. And then I am going to put down 1, 2, 3 of them and then fill the rest in with levees. Now this might seem odd because I could do 6, but ultimately I don't really want 6. I probably could have done 4 just to make this more symmetrical, and actually I will. So we are going to have 4 sluices here. And the whole point of these sluices here are going to be set to 0.7, which means that it is going to get water over this dam and water over this dam. So that when we are in the middle of a drought and we have this floodgate set to 1, these sluices will still allow water into this system to water our crops and make sure everything is irrigated without us having to pay attention to it. And without us having to constantly come over here and lower and raise the floodgates. Now the other thing I'm going to do, I'm going to take double floodgates and unlock them because I have not yet. And I'm going to just replace all 3 of the floodgates up top with those. Now this is based off of the design of a lot of real life dams where they have a sluice at the bottom to let water through in case the water level below the dam has gotten too low. And they have a floodgate up top to make sure that the water is able to go through if the water level on the opposite side in the reservoir gets too high. Now, what I could have done was use levees and then a single line of floodgates, but I am just going to use double floodgates so that with this part of the reservoir, we have the most control we can. There may be instances where we need to drop this lower for whatever reason, and I don't want to give that up this close to our actual colony. I've remembered why I only used 3 sluices before. It's because I actually do want to have a levee here. Because what I want, and we'll see if it happens. Yep, there we go. So this is what I actually want. Apparently 4 sluices will let through enough water to keep the water back here from building up, but I want the water to build up on the other side of the dam. So I will just put that final floodgate in and they will build that. Now I know what some people may be thinking here, which is that this dam is already set up to expel Badwater. So why not just set these to only let water through while it's not contaminated, and then build some sluices over here so that Badwater can get through and set it to just automatically expel the Badwater there. The problem that we would have is that this is further down in the flow than these. So during a bad tide, this is what would happen. So we can't close these floodgates because there's still a bunch of water here. And that wouldn't be automatic. So we'll see that as the bad water comes in, even with these set to open with the contamination and these set to close, the bad water gets to these dams first and starts flowing out into the colony. And it's going to start corrupting all this crops, and our beavers and all that are going to get contaminated. Eventually, this bad water will descend down here and start getting expelled out these sluices, but it is going to wreak havoc on our colony before it gets to that point. So we'll see in just a second here. There it goes. It's opened up these sluices. It's only opened up the furthest one though at this point. But eventually it'll get to, there's the second one and there's the third. So now it'll start flowing out those other ones and eventually stop coming out the dam. Like, there we go. But it is already contaminated all of the water over here. These are unusable. Crops down here are okay if they're in the water, but as we're seeing, partially because these are still open, but as we're seeing, crops over here, this wheat, it's not contaminated, but it's dying because too little of the water over here is pure enough to keep these plants alive. So this bit just does not work as an automatic dam because of the way it is currently set up. So now that that's done, let's move on to building our mega dam. Well, our second mega dam. So we have a large reservoir area over here, and we are going to build this dam up to, I said this height before, it's actually this height is where we need to build it. We're going to build it across this bit of the map. So to start out, I eliminated a bit of terrain here that I needed, but I'm going to build levees, and then on this side we are also going to need a too high levee, and then we will give them a way to get all the way down to build our dam. Now you may be thinking to yourself, like I am, why did I not build this simply one block closer to where the dam was going to be? And it's because I am an idiot. So now to build this dam, we're going to actually need to give some thought to how the water is going to be flowing here. The lowest level of this dam is exactly the same height as the highest level of this reservoir over here. Our sluices are also going to be at that level. We're going to simply build a levee on either side. And then we are going to build 4 sluices down here. Now the purpose of these sluices is mainly going to be to let water through during a drought, either before or after the drought. So knowing that these floodgates are set at 0.165 all of the time, we're going to set these to the corresponding height. So these are 1.65 because they are double floodgates and they are up 1. So it's essentially 0.265 to this system. So we are going to set them. 0.25 is actually probably where we should set them. I'm going to set them to 2.6. So in an instance where water is flowing over the top of these floodgates, these sluices should be closed, and they are. Now, unlike over here, where we built floodgates, we don't actually need fine control of this dam. It does not directly flow into our whole irrigation system over here, so we can build this without floodgates, and everything will end up being fine. So on top of these sluices, we're just going to build 2 more levels of levees, and then at the very top, we're going to put dams. This will mean that regardless of us paying attention to it, when the water on this side of the dam is below that 0.26, it will flow out into this reservoir. It also means that if the water downstream is above that 2.6, it will not be flowing downstream. It will be filling up this reservoir until it gets to a relative 4.65. And at that point, it'll start spilling over these dams and down into the reservoir and into the rest of the system. So with this setup, this dam is maintaining the water level here and here automatically. We do not have to touch it after they finish building. It is set up to handle both dry seasons and floods. Now what we will see though is that it is not set up to handle one thing: bad tides. Unlike down here, where the part that would expel bad water is behind the part that we want water to flow through, we can expel our bad water anywhere out of this part of the system, especially since we have all of our actual flow at the very end. So what I am going to do is right here, I'm going to put some more sluices that are intended to let the bad water out. The benefit of this system is going to be that the water will flow, and once it hits halfway down this dam as it is contaminated, these sluices will open up and expel the bad water out. The bad water will barely have time to get to these sluices to even close them before it is all being expelled out over here. Now that does also mean that we need to do some terraforming. So we're going to get out our old trusty dynamite. And now, because of the way I've done this, I'm going to cause a flood. But that's how it goes sometimes, I guess. Now, luckily, even though the water is flowing out here, and we're about to finish these dams, meaning it won't be able to flow over the end, we do have these sluices down here. So if the water in this reservoir gets too low, we will still be able to get the water through the system, even though we are about to mess the whole thing up. And now we press detonate, and we open a big hole that shows that water will flow out here before it gets over here. And we just have to build our new sluices. Now I'm going to do 2 levels of sluices, and then 1 level of levees. And I'm, of course, going to make sure, as we saw earlier, to turn off close above downstream depth on both of these. Now, what I do want them to have is close below contamination level of 5% so that they will close. I then need to turn these ones on to close above contamination level 5%. And now I could adjust these numbers, but honestly, I think just leaving it at 5% is probably the safest for either of these. So what we will be able to see is that when a bad tide comes through, these will close. These sluices will open, and they will open before the bad water actually gets to these dams and flows down into the rest of the system. So just to make my point, I have activated a bad tide, and we will watch as the water in here is pushed forward, but before it can overwhelm our reservoir over here, it is mostly going to get expelled out over here. Now there is a little bit over here, but it's not enough for it to matter. It is going to be expelled through these sluices and out in the actual bit that usually handles bad water. And because I never adjusted these, the rest of our reservoir is going to immediately drain. Now that is, of course, the issue with doing anything automatically like this, which is if you do something stupid, at the end of the system, it will ricochet and have consequences all the way up the rest of the system. But the point still stands that this part has not been contaminated with bad water. As we can see, the contamination level in this part of the reservoir is only 2%. That is not worrying. I believe bad water effects only start once you're above 25-30%. So this water is completely fine. And the colony would be fine, again, if I had not been a total dummy and left these floodgates open. But the proof of concept still stands. This dam, without touching it, and without paying attention will save us from having to fiddle with these floodgates during a bad tide. It also saves this entire reservoir so that during a bad tide, this can be used for either drinking water or to irrigate crops. Now this one up here does not have that benefit, but we will eventually be moving up the system to make more and more reservoirs anyway, so I don't think it really matters. And now that is where we are going to end today's episode, and I know not very many things have happened, but to recap, we expanded our forestry production and added a ton more oaks and other types of wood over here. We will eventually be utilizing all this for different productions. We will need the pine resin and we will need the maple. Right now, they're just trees over here because we already have a forester. We have incorporated sluices into our old dam so that now during a drought, the water level downstream will be kept at an appropriate level rather than us having to frequently bounce back and forth to adjust our floodgates during a drought. We have also, by that same token, added a floodgate to make sure that the area that irrigates all of our trees stays wet automatically. And last but not least, we have built a new reservoir. This one equipped with floodgates and dams so that we do not have to touch it in the event of a wet season or a dry season. It will make sure that there is adequate flow at all times. And as an added bonus, it has a system by which to expel Badwater during a bad tide without us ever having to touch it. So, if you enjoyed this episode, or if you learned anything about sluices, please do consider subscribing. If you do not, you are at the whims of the algorithm to determine whether or not you ever get back here to this series. And trust me, we have some topics lined up. Power, districts, bots, wonders. Basically, any mechanic remaining in the game that the folktales have access to will be covered in the rest of the series. So, if that interests you, again, please consider subscribing. If you enjoyed the video, please also like and comment. I enjoy reading comments. I've gotten many helpful comments throughout the entirety of this series. There are multiple things that I just miss in an episode, like having my haulers set up wrong to the point where these water tanks would have been having my haulers and my water workers and everyone else pulling from the wrong places and walking way too far with water. I had messed that up in the previous episode and a wonderful commenter had informed me about it, and if they had not, I never would have known. I never would have noticed. So as always, with our big colony now that barely fits into a single frame, thank you so much for watching. Tutopolis will return. Goodbye.